Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, and David gives his regards. And I'd like to dedicate this podcast to Wendy Kenny. She is a business behemoth out here in Atlanta, and she is the one that introduced me to the term seeding. And for those that are unfamiliar with the term seeding, if you can imagine, before you buy a car, you think it's the only one on the road, so you're like, I'm going to be unique. And as soon as you buy that car, you see it everywhere. And as I was preparing for this interview today, I always thought about the people that I see in movies and popular media. They always seem to have their mouth open while they're in the middle of acting. And then I noticed that in real life. And long story short, I found out that a lot of those people were unaffectionately called mouth breathers, but they are also known as shallow breathers. And so our guest today is an expert in breathing. She actually has a mission statement. Her mission statement is to teach everyone to learn to breathe correctly. And not only that, she's a best-selling author. She is a trainer of the Healing Trust, which is an international organization teaching spiritual healing and self-care. And she's the author of 2 books, The Wind is My Mother, The Life and Teachings of a Native American Shaman, and the author of The Fountain of Youth is Just a Breath Away. Fountain of Youth, Breath Away. I want to know more. Do you want to know more? Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Molly Larkin to the podcast. Welcome, Molly.
Well, thank you, Hamza, for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's just that seeding, before you notice it, and then after you notice it, you see it everywhere. And
yeah.
I am no breathing expert by any stretch, but I noticed once I start learning some methods, and maybe I'll learn some more with you, that my life turned out to be so much better, and stress, anxiety, all those things went away just when I incorporated deeper breathing in my life. So enough about me. Why are you the expert in breathing? And we can go into your pedigree as well.
Thank you. Well, how I got into breathing and teaching it is I teach classes in spiritual healing, as you said, for an international organization called the Healing Trust. They're based in England. And part of the curriculum is we teach meditation, we teach self-care, we teach people how to see auras, and we teach people correct breathing. And when I was gearing up to teach the classes, I wanted to learn more about breathing. So I read a bunch of books on it, and I found them all very confusing. So I decided to write the book I had wanted to read. My book, The Fountain of Youth is Just a Breath Away, is a short, simple book, and I've gotten a lot of feedback in my reader reviews that people have said, I've read other books on breathing that were too complicated. This is simple and clear, and I love it. So one of the things that inspired me about breath work is that when you stop to think about it, which we rarely do, we are breathing the same air that the Buddha, the Christ, and all the great spiritual teachers and all our ancestors breathed, which really unites us. And it's important to learn how to breathe correctly. If you watch a little baby breathing, let's say it's in its crib laying on its back breathing, their abdomen rises with each inhale and falls with each exhale, and that's how they breathe. Animals breathe the same way. Probably by the time we're 7 or 8 years old, from observation of the adults around us and starting to take on stress, we lose that ability. And you have to really work hard to start to take it back. The average adult is only using 20% of their breath capacity, of their lung capacity. And that's one reason why pneumonia is so dangerous in the elderly, because they don't have the lung capacity to fight the pneumonia. So I was very inspired by everything I found out about the importance of breath work. The United States Army is now teaching breath work to veterans with PTSD. It actually works better at relaxing them than medication, and even a little better than yoga. So I think that's really important because it's a tragedy that so many veterans come back and are suffering so much from the traumas that they've experienced in war. Did that answer your question? I sort of went on a tangent.
It did. I mean, that's wonderful. And are you in the UK based, or are you based out of the U.S.?
Oh, I'm in the U.S. I'm one of their trainers here in the U.S. I live in New Mexico, actually.
Okay. Oh, Greg Bradenland.
Yes. And it's interesting. I just moved to New Mexico last year in July. And I'm in the Albuquerque area, which is at 5,000 feet. And I have heard of people here who have had to leave and go to the lower altitude because they were having trouble breathing in this thin air. So that makes it all the more important to strengthen your lungs so you can live in such a beautiful place at a high altitude.
Absolutely. I know Nana Boo Boo, that was for David because he spent, I think, 7 or 8 years in New Mexico, and he won't stop talking about it. He loved it so much. So
yeah,
that's for you, David. Well, the reason why I asked if you were UK-based or in the U.S. because you were talking about the Healing Trust, that international organization, and just people that we've interviewed and just in my personal experience, it seems that there's a greater openness to this subject matter overseas. So I wanted to know how you were able to get in touch with them and gravitate towards them more so than their counterparts in the U.S.
Yes, good question. Well, I have actually taken several classes in different modalities of energy healing. And the reason I settled on this English method is several years ago, I was at a dinner party, about 10, 11, 12 years ago, I was at a dinner party in Southern California. I lived there at the time. And I was sitting next to a lovely English woman, and we struck up a conversation. And I said, "And what do you do?" And she said, "Well, my husband and I just moved here from England, and we teach spiritual healing, and anyone can do it." I thought, wow, I like that. Anyone can do it. So I ended up taking their classes, and I took some other classes in different modalities of energy healing, and I liked the spiritual healing modality the best because it's the simplest, and it's as effective as anything out there. So they have a certification program for healing practitioners. I became certified, and then I became actually one of their first trainers in the United States. So it was all a happenstance conversation at a dinner party.
Oh, gotcha. And we always like to say there's no accident. So you were definitely supposed to meet them and go down that path, which is phenomenal.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know we're splitting hairs here, but I was watching a video a couple of days ago, and it was a monk, I believe, and he had mentioned a lot of people have problems with meditation. And he said because of the monkey mind, you try to meditate and your monkey mind is going on about, different things you need to do or something that's pressing on your mind. And he said a way to get around that is to give the monkey a job, and because the monkey will obey, right? So he says, just tell the monkey mind to focus on breathing. And when you focus on breathing, you had a better meditation. So I know we're splitting hairs, but you had mentioned that it's better than meditation.
Well, that's what the Army has found in helping veterans with PTSD. But I agree that breath work is easier than meditation. In fact, I have another book coming out in a couple of months called Meditations on the Natural World, because what I have found in teaching meditation is people have all these excuses why they can't do it. I don't have the time, it's too hard, I have to sit in the lotus position, none of which is really valid. So I designed an online course, which you can find on my website, mollylarkin.com, and I have a companion book coming out that goes through all the reasons people give why they can't meditate and sort of debunks them, and then gives a variety of meditation techniques for them to try. I struggled with meditation for many, many years, until I finally discovered, there's not just one way to meditate. There are a lot of ways to meditate. Focusing on your breath is one of them. And you just have to find the meditation technique that works for you. And what works for the person next door may be completely inappropriate for you. So, I think focusing on breath work, counting your breaths, is a great way to help you focus. It can trick you into meditating.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of laughing because I'm not sitting on a cloud either, so I know I've had my own challenges in dealing with that.
Yeah.
And so, which brings me to my next question. Right now, for the most part, we're not taught to breathe from our diaphragm. So how do you? I mean, you're again, I guess, tricking your body. And my understanding is that when you're not even paying attention, if you're relaxed, if you're sitting and watching TV or you're listening to your favorite music, you automatically start breathing from your diaphragm. How do we make that distinction so that we breathe from it no matter what the situation is?
Well, my recommendation is to do some conscious breathing exercises for a few minutes every day. And even occasionally during your workday, if you're at your desk, just sort of stop, take a break, and focus on inhaling through your nose and letting your abdomen expand, and then exhaling either through your nose or your mouth and letting your abdomen fall back. If you practice that every day regularly, you will start breathing that way when you're not thinking about it. But it does take some effort. I do 10 to 15 minutes of breathing exercises every morning as part of my spiritual practice, which I thought was really good until I found out that my yoga teacher does 30 or 40 minutes every morning. Anything you do is going to help you. Your body is going to recognize the correct breathing and sort of say, hallelujah, they know how to do it, and will help it continue.
What's the difference between, I always get confused with this, and like you said, there's many different techniques, but you said if you breathe through your nose and then exhale through your mouth or your nose, does it matter if you do it all through your nose or in through your nose and out through your mouth?
What breathing in and out your nose does is it helps warm the body. People who take yoga sometimes the teacher will say only nose breathing in this class because it helps warm the body, therefore warms the muscles, and helps make you more limber to do your yoga poses. But if you're feeling too hot, let's say you're taking a hot yoga class and the heat's getting to you, still inhale through the nose, but exhale through the mouth, and it will help cool your body. One of the reasons that we want to inhale through the nose is we have these little tiny hairs called the cilia in the nostrils, and that helps filter the air. So if you're going to breathe in some dust or some bacteria or something like that, the cilia will catch them and stop them from going into your body. It also helps you slow down your breath, and breathing slowly is really, really an important part of developing your health. The average person does 10 to 12 full breaths, meaning inhale, exhale, that counts as one, a minute. That is too fast. If you start practicing breathing exercises and relax into it, the ideal is to just breathe 3 to 5 full breaths a minute. That is very healthy breathing. So we also all need to slow down, and inhaling through the nose will help with that.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you this as far as bedtime. So there's a school of thought that you shouldn't watch anything that would heighten your emotions, via crime or violence or something like that before you go to bed because it shortens your breath. And would that affect your sleep as well? Is that the reasoning behind it?
I think so. Also, I'm currently hooked on British murder mysteries, and I binge watched them. And last night, my favorite current mystery was a particularly upsetting episode, and I had a real hard time sleeping. I usually sleep very well, but I had a really hard time sleeping. So lesson learned, not to watch anything that's violent or upsetting too close to bedtime. Probably ideally we shouldn't watch it at all because it's upsetting us. It's upsetting our nervous system. It gets into our subconscious and rolls around in there, giving us, negative vibes.
That's a really good point. I'm going to make an assumption that you do not sleep with the TV on. Is that correct?
Oh, God, no. You shouldn't even have a TV in your bedroom.
Right.
Because,
And I didn't want to, I wanted to start that because I wanted to get an expert opinion. I do not, for the record, so people don't blaze me in the comments. But for, let's just say, a friend of mine, they sleep with the TV on, right? And you mentioned how it's in your subconscious before you go to bed. What if you have no control over what's shown on the television while you're asleep? Would that affect your breathing as well?
yes, I agree. What you said earlier was it's going to tighten your breath because you tense up. So that's just a very bad habit, in my opinion. I won't even allow a TV in my room.
I'm kind of joking, but I mean, I agree with you. I remember a long time ago, it was a bad habit. And, today in the technology world, we talk about virtual reality and artificial intelligence. I think the old school way of looking at it is we've always had that virtual reality or artificial intelligence if we allowed our subconscious mind to be subjected to a television that's playing while we are asleep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And interestingly, on the other side of that coin is I know a lot of people who have wanted to learn a language, so they will play audio tapes of the language lessons while they're sleeping to help their subconscious take it in, or inspiring talks, positive thinking, anything like that you play while you're sleeping will probably have a very positive effect on you.
I'm a big fan of that, and I heard, I'm not famous, so Trevor Noah's famous for saying that he learned, I think he knows 5 or multiple languages, let's just say, and he learned them by playing tapes while he was asleep.
Wow. Well, you know what? I'm going to start trying that myself because I've been trying to learn Spanish for a couple of years, and I'm not doing very well, so maybe it's time for me to up my game and listen for
Sure. Well, once you know the secret, I'm kind of telling on myself because I still have the analog, the cord that you plug into your MP3 player, and I play binaural beats. I just try different things, binaural beats or what's it called, alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, delta waves, gamma waves. And I always wake up with the cord around my neck in the middle of the night. So subconsciously either it's telling me that or I'm tossing and turning while I'm trying to process this information.
Well, maybe you should just use speakers and not have a cord that's going to strangle you.
Well, I'm kind of playful with this because the argument is, especially for binaural beats, that they're better when you have headphones on because they're two different beats, right? So it's like,
yeah. I understand. Yeah.
So
well, just be careful.
Yes, indeed. There's an asterisk in this conversation on the podcast. Do not try it at home. Speak with an expert first.
Yes.
There you go. We cover ourselves. Let me ask you another breathing exercise. I know one breathing exercise where you talked about breathing through your nose. There's other exercises where you actually close one nostril and breathe through that nostril. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called alternate nostril breathing, and a little hard to describe without being able to see me, but let's say, for example, you take your right thumb, close your right nostril, breathe in through the left. Close the left nostril and release the right nostril and exhale through the right. And you keep going back and forth like that. It's very good for balancing your brain. And an interesting thing that most people don't know this, but in our regular day-to-day life, our brains or our brains and our bodies alternate which nostril is predominant in your breathing. And like every 2 or 3 hours, it will shift. So you might be predominantly breathing unconsciously through your right nostril, and a few hours later, you'll be predominantly breathing through your left without even knowing it. The body does it automatically. And that's a way of balancing our brains. But if you do alternate nostril breathing consciously, that's really good for balancing your brain. It's one of my favorites. I do it every morning.
I'd like to stay there for a second because until I had come across garlic pills and ginger pills, I would first of all, let me say this. For a long time, I used to just destroy ice cream. And I know as an adult, right, all the mucus and what have you. And so I would have these runny noses, and I should put another disclaimer. This is a graphic podcast today. So anyway, I noticed that I could breathe out of one nostril and not out of the other, and it would change throughout the day, depending on if I could breathe or not. So what you're saying is I appreciate it, because you're saying that the body is adjusting even without us knowing, based off of the left and right nostril.
Precisely. So good observation.
Wow. Okay, so since I'm being graphic, I have to ask you an older man cosmetic question.
Yes.
Okay, so older men, not me, but I do want to say that, because guys get in trouble for this all the time, their ears, hair grows out of their ears, and excessive hair out of their nose. How important is it to keep those nose hairs trimmed? Because it is, like you said, it's a filtering mechanism. You don't want to cut all the hair out, but how much is too much?
What an interesting question that I've never thought about before. My guess is it would be a good idea to trim the nose hairs, because you already have cilia inside, which is different than nose hairs. You already have the cilia that's doing its filtering job, and I think you'll have trouble getting enough air into your nose if you have nose hairs blocking it. That's my educated guess. I've never read anything about that.
No, it's just good to know. And yeah, well, we always want to ask questions that others don't ask.
Yes, good job.
But do you have a breadth of experience? And we can go back to the breathing, but I was really interested in your book, The Wind is My Mother. And on your blog, you were talking about your first shaman that you had run into. I wanted to know how you had gotten into the life. And before you answer that, the reason why I'm asking is, and this is my understanding, but when you talk about energy healing and you talk about spirit guides and stuff like that, those are air energies. And when you talk about shamanic energy, those are more earth energies. So for you covering both, it's kind of like you're covering both realms, in my opinion.
Yes. Alberto Villoldo, who is a very well-known teacher of shamanism and has written a number of best-selling books, says that shamanism is energy medicine, which makes perfect sense. I'm trying to think of what the next place to go with that. Energy medicine really does work with, on some level, all the elements, just as shamanism does, because that's what brings balance. So, I mean, when I work with clients, sometimes I do the straight spiritual healing as it's taught by the Healing Trust, but sometimes I use shamanic techniques that I've learned from Bearheart, which includes using herbs, burning herbs, and the smoke, and I take a feather fan and fan off the client, which is clearing their energy field. I might sing and drum, and the drum is an earth element because the wooden frame comes from trees, and the skin comes of an animal that was once alive. And the songs come from the air. So, and also sometimes I work with crystals, which come from the earth. So it's all there. It's all there. All those elements are useful.
Sure, and thanks for that clarification. Do you determine whomever you're working with, like you'll get an inkling or you'll get messages to use earth energy or shamanic energy versus energy healing, or
yes.
Like you just said, sometimes you use a combination. How does that usually work for you?
Well, I usually do either spiritual healing or shamanistic work. It depends on the client, what their need is, why they're coming to see me. It depends on how open they would be to drumming and chanting. So it's a case-by-case basis. I don't have a set policy. I just intuit with each client what is most appropriate for them.
That makes total sense. Have you Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the interesting thing is one works just as well as the other. Spiritual healing, as I do it for the Healing Trust, is just as effective as the shamanic work. It just depends on which the client will be most comfortable with.
Absolutely. Have you? I'm just really interested in my depth of experience is greater in the energy work, and I'd like it to grow in the shamanic work. Did one come before the other, or did you pick them up at the same time?
Well, you know what? It's pretty close together. I met Bearheart and started studying with him and learning some of his, actually, after a few years of our relationship, of knowing one another, he took me on as one of his apprentices. In his tradition, which is Muskogee Creek, every medicine man is supposed to have 8 apprentices. And he had 8, and I was one of them. So he taught me a lot of his medicine ways. But about the same time is when I discovered energy healing and started taking classes in that. So, yeah, it was pretty simultaneous.
Sure. It's weird. I know in Atlanta we have, I guess every city has its haven, but in Atlanta we have like half of the city is still, what are you guys talking about? And then others will gravitate towards the conversations that we're talking about. But
exactly.
I've seen maybe 1 or 2, if we were using a Venn diagram, like 1% of people in energy healing go into the shamanic and vice versa. And I was just wondering, since you had come into both, I'm just wondering why it would seem, if knowledge is infinite, that there would be greater numbers that would have an openness to both.
Well, you have to have the opportunity to learn it properly. Bearhart's, his own training from the elders and medicine men of his tribe was 16 years. And he went through many tests, singing a certain chant while he walked through a den of rattlesnakes so he wouldn't be bitten, standing in a river at midnight in a raging river and facing down whatever terrors came towards him. He was tested. And so he always had what's the word? He wasn't impressed by people who take weekend courses in shamanism. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the real ones, they went through incredible tests, took many years. It's not something you learn quickly. Plus, where do you get the opportunity? I mean, there are people like Alberto Vialdo who teach workshops, but even with him, like you go for 2 weeks and then go away for several months and then go back for 2 weeks. It's a big investment of time. So that's much more impressive and not always accessible, because I think his courses are expensive. So not everybody has the opportunity to meet someone and study with them. The lucky thing for me is Bearheart chose me as his apprentice, and he didn't charge me any money. So.
Oh, nice.
That's
a good mock-up.
Yes. Well, one of the things he teaches, and this is mentioned in The Wind is My Mother, in their tribal tradition, and this is really true of all Native American tribes I've met, the saying is, it's hard for us to say thank you without something in our hand, meaning you're going to give a gift. So when I would go to visit Bearheart, I was living in California at the time, and he was in Albuquerque, where I am now. I would come and I would take him out to dinner. I would buy him gas. I would buy him groceries. That was my exchange. So something always has to be given. And a big part of Native American culture is the concept of the giveaway. Native Americans are possibly the poorest demographic in the United States, but they are the most generous people because it's in their culture. You're always giving, because by giving, then you receive, and you're taken care of by the Great Spirit.
That's a really good point. That's excellent. Excellent point.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, I have a nephew of Bearheart's lives in Europe, and he conducts vision quests there. And I was in Europe one time, and I got together with him, and he said, here's the thing, a Native American can't charge money for a vision quest, for putting you on a vision quest, because it's a spiritual matter. And yet, the people going on the quest should have the understanding of giving something comparable to the amount of time that the medicine man is putting into putting you up. But our Caucasian culture does not understand that. We're always anxious and happy to get something for nothing. So Bearhart's nephew said to me, you know, one thing I've learned here in Europe, Caucasians just don't understand the giveaway. And I said, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's a shame. When Bearhart used to put people on vision quests, I sort of acted as his representative and told people what kind of offering they should be giving to him, because he wouldn't say, but somebody had to say, because, one time he put somebody on a vision quest for 4 days. That's 4 days out of his life where he doesn't even sleep when he's putting people on a vision quest. And this person at the end offered him $25.
Whoa.
I was distraught. I mean, how much would you pay for a 4-day workshop that wouldn't even be as profound as a traditional vision quest? So,
right.
Yeah, that's
wow.
an important thing to learn.
I want to stay here because there's so many tangents to go off on that. Because for even in the spiritual community, when you go to some events, you have a free will offering, right?
Yes.
And then that basket may be empty, and then you have the other end of the spectrum that it's $2,000, and everyone's like, how could you, especially if it's dealing with spirituality, how could you dare charge? This should be free. So what you mentioned is something that is practical and is probably essential where people are missing out. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I try to make my workshops affordable. I would never charge $2,000. And I'm always open to an energy exchange or, well, what can you afford? And in the conversation, I will test the person's sincerity. You know, are they trying to get something for nothing, or do they really want to do this sincerely, and they simply cannot afford whatever the suggested amount is? So you have to work with that sort of on an intuitive level, but I don't want to gouge people. I want this information to be out there to help people in their lives.
I'm just thinking, I'm going to play devil's advocate because you have, I'm thinking before she transitioned, Sylvia Browne, right? So Sylvia Browne would, you know, if you don't know her story, or to the audience that may not know her story, she starts out, especially coming into this, I don't even want to call it a genre, but to earn a living, she was just learning and, you know, did the whole freebie stuff and kind of earned her chops, right? She was trying to build her energy healing, just learning the practice. And then she became the household name that everybody knows. And so her time is much more, not that it's more valuable, but she wasn't as available or accessible as she was when she first started. So you had, if you wanted a reading from Sylvia Browne, it was like maybe a year, 18 months, 2 years before you even got a reading, and you were happy to get it. So, you know, so sometimes it's, and I think that's just probably a perfect example that I'm thinking of, like for you or anyone else, when you're starting out, people may not, like you said, the cultures are different. So if you're doing something for free or something that's perceived for free, you know, you got to give yourself greater worth, because if you don't, then the audience that you're trying to reach won't either. Right.
Yeah. Well, I have two thoughts in response to that. One is, if you want to get a reading or whatever from somebody who's very famous, here the thing is, there are a lot of good people out there doing similar work. So maybe find someone not so expensive. The other thing is, now I lost my train of thought on that. In my spiritual healing classes, one of the areas we talk about is charging for your work. So what we do is we encourage people, once they've gone through the courses, start practicing on your friends, family, pets for free till you start to feel your confidence. And then you can start charging an amount that you feel comfortable with. Now, a lot of my students, they don't want to charge because they think that's not spiritual. And I say, well, the thing you have to think about is the client is getting value. They're getting better. And you spend a certain amount of money to take these courses and you put a lot of time into practicing. You should be compensated for that. So some of them get it and will eventually charge when they reach the point where they're really doing good work. And some of them don't. But a lot of them don't want to be professional healers. They just want to do it for their family and pets, which is fine.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a very hard issue to figure out charging for spiritual work. It's always a challenge for everyone. And the other thing I do is I do it sliding scale. There's a certain amount I say I charge on my website, but if somebody doesn't have it, I'll just say, what can you afford? Because I'm not going to turn anybody away.
Are you familiar with Dan Pena?
No.
Okay, so Dan Pena is, I want to say, a duke now. He's somewhere over in Europe, living in a castle. But he started out in, I want to say, the streets of Los Angeles once, many blue moons ago, and he became a financial advisor. And so the reason why I'm bringing him up is he helps a lot of investment bankers and things like that. And he said, you guys may not know this, but I get a lot of calls from spiritual healers. I'm not going to mention any names, but he's like, I get calls from spiritual healers that need another instrument to actually make a living or earn money. And and he was speaking to the argument or the discussion that you and I just had as far as developing worth. So it just seems like where someone's charging 5 cents a minute and now they're charging $4,000 for a weekend. It may be they reach a point like, hey, you know what? I actually have some value that I'm giving to the audience that no one else has, and they can benefit from it. Yeah.
A lot of it is just about building your confidence. When I first started out taking the healing classes, I would work on friends, and my next-door neighbor came to me for a session, and she was in a lot of pain, which she thought was from a new medication she was taking, and she was planning on going to her doctor and asking him to change the medication or reduce the dose. And I gave her the healing session, after which she had no more pain, and it never came back. So I called up my tutor, my teacher, and I said, so this client came in and she was in a lot of pain, and then by the time the session was over, she had no more pain and it never came back. Do you think that had anything to do with the healing session I did? He laughed and he said, absolutely, you're a very gifted healing practitioner. It absolutely is related. But I was so green starting out, I didn't even think that I had the ability to help somebody on that level. So, now I've been doing it for about 12 years, and I've seen enough results with clients that I know it works, and it has nothing to do with me. That's the other important thing for people to understand when you do this type of work. You are a channel. You are a vehicle. And Bearhart talks about this in The Wind is My Mother, because he was a traditionally trained healer of his tribe, and he said, it's not me. I just know how to put things together so the Great Spirit can come through and provide a healing for the client. And that's a very important thing for all healers to understand. You have to get your ego out of it. Whether the client gets better or the client doesn't, that's part of their journey, and you did your best. And that's all you can do.
Before he transitioned, Wayne Dyer had a really interesting story, like you mentioned, about the ego, because I believe he was meditating or he was doing breath work in this story, and before he knew it, he had left the ground, so he was levitating, and his first thought was, man, I wonder what this will be like on Letterman, or not Letterman, Johnny Carson, right? And he went crashing to the ground, and he was never able to replicate that ever again.
Yes, yeah. One of the things I like about the courses we teach is we put a big emphasis on self-care of the healing practitioner. Because if you are clogged up with a lot of your own issues and dramas and traumas, you won't be a clear channel for the healing energy to come through. So it's really important. It's like physician heal thyself.
Mm-hmm.
Really important. You got to get your ego out of it.
I'd like to talk a little bit about popular media, and I'm a big movie guy, and I love Marvel and all that good stuff. And I will say, just to echo what you were talking about earlier with the Shaman, that there's a TV show called Cloak and Dagger, and they're teenagers in New Orleans, and they kind of discover their powers. I mean, it's been done, but with this twist, since it's in New Orleans, they highlight the importance of a gift. When they go to different worlds, they can't go to certain levels unless they gave a gift. And I know that Joe Vitale talks a lot about it in his books with Yanyas and the gift. So it seems like the spiritual, to be successful in the spiritual world, it is that give and take. And maybe there's a shortcoming on manifesting on our half because we're not giving and receiving. What's your take on that?
I think there are two keys to success in life. One is to have a gratitude practice, and the other is, humility. To request help from a higher power and get out of the way so it can come. I do a lot of affirmations as part of my morning practice, and I just ask for help and always say thank you. Always say thank you at the same time.
Let me ask you a gender question now. So many guys, including myself, I'll put myself in this group, we've gotten into trouble in the past. I don't know the future yet, so hopefully this won't happen to me anymore. But if I'm with the opposite sex and she's highly emotional at that moment, guys erroneously say, calm down. What's a better way to approach that to get her to slow her breathing down? All right. Test. Okay. Yes. And so, Molly, I was just asking a question about gender wars, or not gender wars, but, the give and take that Mars has with Venus from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
And guys, right? So guys usually erroneously would tell a girl to calm down, which we know is not the right verbiage. But how can we fix the situation? I guess as a guy, we're always trying to fix something, but we're getting our girlfriends, wives, spouses to settle down and bring an anxiety level down to where they're breathing normally again. How do we do that?
Well, I'm certainly no expert on this topic, but what comes to me is to stop and be quiet and listen and take some slow, deep breaths, and then maybe say, well, let's just take a moment and breathe. And just say, I want to understand what you're saying, so let's just take a moment and rest and breathe and start again.
Now, what's the difference between breathing and a deep sigh?
When people sigh, it's because they are not breathing correctly and their body is starved for oxygen and automatically just does this big thing to bring more in. If you have a regular breathing practice and learn how to breathe correctly on a regular basis, you'll probably stop sighing. I used to be a big sigher, just in the middle of the day for no reason, just I didn't realize what that was about. Once I learned breathing, it never happened again.
Wow, that's a really good point. So is this why it could be diet, it could be sitting, sedentary lifestyle, but I can't imagine generations before where you would get that 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock crash where there's no more energy. Is that due to lack of oxygen in the lungs as well?
I think it could be. It also has to do with your diet, I think. And actually, recently I've been reading that I don't know if it's about crashes, but it's really good to take a nap every day. Apparently, it's very, very healthy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm a big fan. And if I don't get it, I'm kind of cranky. It's a shame. I guess that's life. Like kids would stomp up the stairs, myself included, and you hated taking naps when you were young. But when you get older, you appreciate the fact that you can do it if you can.
Yes, yes, yes. I think in our culture we never get enough rest, and most people don't get enough sleep. And sleep, I wrote a blog post called "Why We Should Make Sleep a Sacred Ceremony," and I wrote about how to approach it, the importance of making enough time for it, how to do rituals before you go to sleep to relax yourself and your sleeping environment. It's essential. That's where we rejuvenate. That's where our body resets. If we haven't watched a violent TV show before we went to bed, that's where we could get messages from our spirit guides and guidance. Bearhart had a favorite practice that he always taught is before you go to bed, ask a question of the universe. And when you wake up, see what information comes. It's a good way of accessing your subconscious and your guides.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I would also say that to the audience, for those that say they don't dream or can't remember their dreams, it's probably because that dream is cut short by that alarm clock. Like you said, you're not getting enough sleep. And I've tested both sides where if I'm not using an alarm clock, that dream will, I think it's a longer extended version, if you will, of the movie. And so I can remember it more versus when the alarm clock immediately goes off, then I totally forgot what just happened.
Yes, yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Huh. Oh, and to that note, I know for me, I work remotely, so I am like, oh, I don't spend a lot of time in front of the computer, or I drink enough water, but it was actually apps and just little software on the computer where the computer would go black every 40 minutes or so to force me to take a break. And it sounds like for you, from what you're saying with the breath work and the Fountain of Youth, that this may be a time to tune in to see how you're breathing at that time as well?
Yes. In fact, productivity advice is you should take a break every 40 to 50 minutes. Go and walk around the house or go pet your cat or your dog and then come back to your computer, because I'm on the computer all day long. And it's really important to take a break, and that's a really good time to take a breath. Do some breathing exercises to reset yourself. And you'll come back refreshed.
Let's stay there for a second, Molly, because there was a recent article this year, and the numbers are that more people are working remotely. And as a con of that is that they're not getting the social fulfilling that they used to get. And so there's added anxiety that they never anticipated by being away from your fellow human. So what's your take on balancing that?
Wow, that's a really good question. Before I started working remotely in 1999, when I lived in California, I was a paralegal in a law firm, and I actually loved the work, and I loved my coworkers. We worked very hard. It was very stressful, but we all got along really well, and I miss that. When I left the law firm and started working, I just focused on writing and blogging and working out of my home office all the time. I really missed that camaraderie. So I think the answer to that is you have to set yourself up for more social engagements, go out for dinner with friends. I love to play cards, so I get together with friends and play cards. And you have to make a point of doing that, or you will get much too isolated.
Mm-hmm. And I know in here in Atlanta, I'm sure in New Mexico as well, we have those virtual offices where people kind of get together, other entrepreneurs. And a lot of it's funny because a lot of work doesn't get done there. It's just it seems like people are they're gravitating there just for that human element.
Yes, yeah. The other thing that I encourage people to do is join a mastermind group. People who are in, well, it doesn't have to be an identical field, but people who are also perhaps self-employed or starting a new business, being entrepreneurs, and getting together in a mastermind group is an opportunity to interact with other people, brainstorm for each of you to get new ideas about how to approach your work. And so you're getting a fresh perspective and you're getting some social interaction.
That's a good point. It leads me actually to the next question, because I know some people, like you said, if they're using a scarcity mindset and they say they don't have enough time to meditate, but they will find time to meditate if they meditate in a group. So have you ever formed breathwork groups?
Interesting question. No, and because if you haven't been doing breathwork for a while, you should not do it for more than a few minutes when you're starting out, because the brain is not used to being oxygenated. And if you just from start try to do breath work for 5 or 10 minutes, you could get lightheaded. So you have to build up to it. What I have done is meditation groups, because they're not focusing on deep breathing.
Right. You know what? You said a really good point, because I do remember a couple of times through some deep breathing, I wake up maybe the next day like, what just happened? And so how do you know, is there a line that you cut off that you're like, whoa, your brain is like, what's going on? And your brain shuts down. How do you prevent that?
Well, you have to gradually build up. In this busy world, I can't imagine there are very many people other than my yoga teacher who are going to want to do breath work for 30 to 40 minutes. So if you build up gradually, it's like building muscles. When you go to the gym and you want to get healthy and strong, you don't start out with the heaviest weight. You gradually increase your weights to the point where, you reach a point where you can do very, very heavy weights that you could never have done on the first day. So it's a matter of gradually building up to it, and don't overdo it. And sense where your body's at, and make sure you are still feeling clear and strong. And stop before you get to that point of too much breath.
Sure. And you had hinted at it earlier. We were talking about spiritual weekenders, right? And so, you get this whole elation over the weekend, and you're saying this is over time. So I think you would, if we could make a parallel with breath work, but also in your spiritual practice, it doesn't happen overnight. So for the person that's used to, this is going to happen and I'm going to be totally transformed over the weekend, what kept you going when you met roadblocks and you felt like, you know what, I'm just going to go back to my old life because I worry more now than I did in my old life? What would you say to that?
Good question. I've been a spiritual seeker my whole life, and I tried a lot of things. And when I came upon the Native American path, it was like, wow, this is it. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. And I've been going to Native American ceremonies and practicing Native American spirituality for 35 years. And in terms of meditation, once I found a meditation practice that worked for me, I was happy to stick with it, because I've done enough research on meditation that I know what it does for you, and I could feel the difference in my life. And I tell people, you don't have to meditate for a long time. You could start out 2 minutes a day, but you're starting to create the habit. And then you maybe after a month, 3 minutes, and then 5 minutes, till you find the right amount for you. I only meditate like 10 minutes a day, but I reap all the benefits because that's the perfect amount for me.
Mm-hmm. When you said that triggered a thought of Abraham, and Abraham is famous for saying that we don't know how badly we fought to get in these bodies. Like, I mean, physically we know with the running into the egg, 1,000,000, and then there's one that hits the egg, but you have no idea. So because of that, you should meditate for 23 out of the 24 hours of the day, because you came here to kind of kick up dust and get your knees dirty.
Yeah. And when you talked about 23 hours out of the 24, well, a lot of that has to just do with mindfulness throughout your day. One of my favorite things to do is do the dishes, because it's a perfect place to practice mindfulness, and it's very rewarding to see things go from dirty to clean. You have an immediate result, and I like that.
Wow. So it sounds like overall you're talking about establishing habits. Once we establish these good habits, then we're developing a lifelong practice, if you will.
Exactly. It's about habits.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if I'm starting a practice, and I used to be a weekend spiritual person, and I want to really develop good habits, lifelong habits, how would I do that with Molly Larkin?
Well, it would depend on what interested you, what you wanted to do. If you want to start with breath work, a few minutes a day. If you want to start with meditation, a few minutes a day. Sorry, my cat just came in and knocked things off my desk. If you want to do Native American ceremony, maybe once a week, because that's a little more involved. If you want to heal yourself, go to a healer, an energy healer, and discuss with them how often you should come. Most of the emotional traumas that we experience in our life, particularly as children, when it happens, like let's say, for example, you're in a little fender bender and in your car, and at that moment of the trauma of being hit, you will take a deep intake of breath. And in that moment, the trauma is stored in your energetic field. And it will stay there for perhaps decades and might eventually manifest into physical illness. That's one of the wonderful things about energy healing, is that energy healing moves energy and helps you release those old traumas. And breath work does the same thing. That's why it's so effective for veterans with PTSD, because the breath work moves the trauma out of your body. So I'd say just find a spiritual practice that registers with you, that you feel comfortable with. Like I said, I was a spiritual seeker my whole life, and I tried so many things. It took me a long time to find the one that worked for me. You've got to find a spiritual practice or a health practice that resonates with you and that you really enjoy. And if you enjoy it, there's your motivation to keep doing it.
And that, the audience, is a perfect example of how to use humility, because I was trying to lead you to promote your books and your website, and you gave the most humble answer in the entire planet. That was phenomenal. We did not practice that. So she definitely walks the walk and talks the talk, folks. So I'll ask that question again, but this time let them know where they can get your books and your website so they can get in touch with you, because that would be phenomenal.
Thank you very much. Okay, my website is mollylarkin.com. Larkin is Larkin, where I have a blog, I have a podcast, and I have a page where I sell books and CDs. You can also get my work on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and look up Molly Larkin. So I have The Wind is My Mother, The Life and Teachings of a Native American Shaman, which I co-authored with my spiritual teacher, Berhart. And The Fountain of Youth is Just a Breath Away, breathing exercises for relaxation, health, and vitality. And on my website, I have an online class that teaches you how to meditate called Meditations on the Natural World. And I have a meditation CD. So that's a lot of stuff, and you'll find them all on my website, mollylarkin.com.
Absolutely. And lastly, I believe you do have a giveaway if they sign up to your newsletter. What does that entail?
Oh, yeah. So if you sign up for my blog, there, give me your name and address, and then you will get all my future podcasts and blogs. And you also get 3 lessons from my meditation course. So free 3 lessons.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza. Shout out to David that didn't make it today. And Molly Larkin, it was a pleasure learning more about breathwork and your depth of experience. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Hamza. Thank you so very much for having me.
Let's stay in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Are we off?